time to get inside the Giants huddle.
Let's go, back to your huddle.
On Giants.com.
Tempo.
And the Giants mobile app.
Go.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Yeah.
We welcome two-time Super Bowl champion David Diehl into the Giants huddle. I'm Paul Dottino as we are in the press box in Cleveland after the Giants' 17-13 Week 2 preseason loss to the Cleveland Browns. But really, this whole week was continuing to evaluate the young players, not just here in this game, David, but it was about what happened during the dual practices during the week.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, that's the one great thing about practicing up against competition and great competition like the Cleveland Browns, who were a playoff team last year. You want to see, number one, who are the young players who can adapt and adjust on the move, and number two, now in the second year of this offense and defense, who could elevate their game to the second level as a veteran because of their knowledge and understanding of what scheme are we running, what are we looking to accomplish out of it, and moreover, for the Giants offensive line to continue to get that gel and cohesion up against a different type of scheme that Joe Woods and that defense ran.
Now, the Giants, like everybody else in the NFL, will have to cut 5 more players come by Tuesday. That gets them down from 85 to 80. Joe Judge did say going into this game he wanted to have a pretty good idea of where his roster stood. I still think he's probably going to have some questions going into Foxborough and New England. Well, that New England game will wind up being home next weekend.
No doubt about it. I mean, figure you're right, going into New England to do the joint practices and coming back for the game. But I think when we saw the amount of young players play, especially at the wide receiver and the defensive back position, those rooms are very, very heavy right now with players. And with this roster cutting down and having to get down to 80 players over the next couple of days, you know, they're going to be able to evaluate this film and, more importantly, evaluate what took place in practice and who during this competition was able to step up and make plays and be a valuable member of this roster.
All right, let's get to the bread and butter of what happened during the week, because most of your starters, if you're the Giants, and even with Cleveland, did not play in this game today as we tape. But we did see a lot of those guys going against each other during the course of those dual practices. Where do you think the Giants got the most information from and the most things that they could feel good about?
I think, number one, where they need to improve is the 2-minute drill. I think we saw on both sides of the ball on Friday some errors made, especially on the offensive side of the ball, a sack given up, a false start. Those are all things that when you sit there and you go through a game, you can't take back, because those are the things that make the difference between winning or losing games, and we know how much each game means to you. And then the other thing for the defensive side of the ball, being able to go up against some of these receivers and the type of scheme that Kevin Stefanski runs, all the bootlegs, all the nakeds, all the change of direction, marrying it to the run game, it makes you be honest and make sure that you know your X's and O's and keep your eye and focused on the football instead of being over-aggressive, and then all of a sudden Baker Mayfield rolls out and has an easy completion. It allows them to keep their P's and Q's and, more importantly, get all of the communication done that's needed.
The fans will get their first look this summer at Daniel Jones when the starters play probably a half or maybe even a little more against the Patriots. But you've been able to see Jones at practice and saw him this week in Cleveland. What is your assessment of his progression so far?
I think I love the way that he's running this offense. He's really taken ownership of it. You could see the communication and the command in and out of the line of scrimmage and at the line of scrimmage. If he sees a different look, whether it's with protections, whether it's with the wide receivers getting their hots and sights, those are the constant things you're looking to see an improvement of. And the one thing that we know is that with Daniel Jones, he's a player that's going to make a mistake, but he's not going to make it twice. He learns from his mistakes, and the more reps that they're going to get together with the timing with the wide receivers and getting this cohesion with the offensive line, the better off he's going to be, let alone when Saquon Barkley comes back.
Well, you mentioned Saquon Barkley. Now, from what we understand, he may see some 7-on-7 action, but still no contact in New England during the joint practices. This is a guy who, because he's coming back from knee surgery, is not able to play right now, which means these guys like Booker and Clement and Brightwell are trying to earn a spot behind him. What have you seen from those guys so far?
Well, I think Devontae Booker was a great pickup during the offseason because he fits this scheme well. He can catch out of the backfield, but his ability to run the zone scheme and the power scheme, to let those blocks develop, and the minute that he sees that hole, he gets his foot in the ground, gets north and south, and runs with his pads underneath him. We saw Corey Clement today. He can bounce and work the perimeter. He can catch out of the backfield as well. And the thing that I love to see out of both of them, they both were able to step up, handle blitzes, get the pass protection, get their pads underneath linebackers, and hold up, because it's not just about running the football. And in regards to Saquon Barkley, I love the process that the Giants are taking right now. You don't want to rush them out there too early. And let's face it, when you have a 17-game schedule like the Giants have this year, something that they've never faced before, every single hit, every single contact, especially when you're doing it at the running back position, counts. So the fact that they've been able to slowly monitor him, have him on a pitch count to make sure that he's 100% healthy for the season, that's the most important thing, because you're not getting wins in August.
Now, Clement's got a little more quicks than Booker, but I think the big thing for Clement today, look, that neither back put up big numbers, but Clement held on to the ball. He had that costly fumble down near the end zone against the Jets in Game 1. I think it was important for him to make sure he cleaned that up.
Especially when we know ball security means job security in the NFL, especially at the running back position. So it's at least he got it out of his system during that preseason game up against the Jets, but that's what makes the difference between being a valuable backup and a starter in the NFL, especially at the running back position.
We did not see much of Gary Brightwell. In fact, he didn't come in until the fourth quarter against the Browns. Hard to make an evaluation there.
Very hard to make an evaluation. I was expecting more runs out of him, especially in the second half, but I think they wanted to give more to Corey Clement. We know what Gary Brightwell can bring to the special teams department. That's one of the reasons why Quinn was so big on him, because of what his production was at Arizona. But looking at his game film from college, he can run the gap scheme. He understands the zone scheme and how to set those blocks up and let him to develop and not run into the backs of his offensive linemen. But there's nothing that duplicates game reps in a game experience like he could have had today, and hopefully we'll see some more in New England.
In the booth earlier, you commented to me there was a run behind the left side where he really showed patience and set up his blockers and then made the quick juke to get a pretty darn good gain. It was the kind of play you can only get in live action, and you have to be able to know what you're doing.
No doubt about it. It was an outside zone perimeter play, but they actually utilized a down block by the tight end and pulled the left guard, Kenny Wiggins, out there. And sometimes the running backs see daylight and they want to hit it right away, but understanding the scheme and seeing Kenny Wiggins pull in front of him, he slowed his pace down and let that block develop, which meant an extra 6 yards on the run.
All right, let's talk about the wide receivers for a second, because David Sills has been the star of camp, showed some big playability again this week in Cleveland, and what happens? He catches a touchdown pass in the game against the Browns.
No doubt about it. That was one of the players that I think we were all looking to step up. When you think about the competition between him, C.J. Board, and Pettis, I think C.J. Board has taken that role on because of what he means to special teams and how he can contribute to the wide receiver position. But with David, he left some plays on the field last week up against the Jets, had the one knocked out of his hands in the contested ball, and had some drops on Friday. But today, to come back, have some big catches, have one at the sideline, and to have a touchdown catch, those are the types of improvement, and more importantly, the bounce-back games that you need out of a young player.
Now, Ross and Mack, because they're nicked up, did not play against the Browns and didn't do anything, of course, to help their cause because they were sidelined. I don't know if any of the other receivers in this game necessarily separated themselves.
No, I really don't either. I mean, when you think about those guys and Ross and everybody else being injured, you hope that players emerge and make more and more plays, especially when it comes to David Sills and Pettis. But as of right now, I don't see any of those guys that have really stepped up that think that when they're out there with number 8, that this is a guy that we can depend on and who's going to be consistent, because we truly haven't seen that throughout the entire training camp.
All right, let's get to the beef of this now, because the offensive line is where it all starts. We saw the starters do a lot of work during the week in the joint practice. Today, we wound up seeing left to right Barton, Wiggins, Harrison, Larson, and Slade, with only Heggie and Burton as the two other linemen who dressed. Hard to get much of an evaluation from all of this, but I will say it was quite clear that Joe Judge has got guys who are fighting on the back of the depth chart.
No doubt about it. I think Jonathan Harrison did a nice job in being stout in the middle. I think Kenny Wiggins, not only in some of the down blocks and zone schemes, but open up some holes. I wanted to see how Ted Larson did today. Obviously, he's only been on the Giants for a week. They didn't play him before that Jets game, but he's a veteran. He could change around the terminology, and this is a big game for him. And moving forward, especially with the Giants and Dave Gettleman and Joe Judge looking to figure out what's the best combination up front, but who are going to be the valuable backups, especially with Ted Larson playing both guards and center position. We know that they're going to turn this roster around and do as much as they need to with all these joint practices, with these preseason games. The eyes aren't only on preseason games. With the amount of joint practices taking place week in and week out, you're not only competing up against the guys on your team, but all 31 other teams as well.
Let's talk about the joint practices with the Browns, because Nate Solder kind of on load management, didn't do a whole lot. Shane Lemieux didn't do a whole lot. Same situation for him. But I thought that Thomas and Hernandez and Gates did very well in those practice sessions.
No doubt about it, and I think that's the one great thing about going up against the defensive line for the Cleveland Browns. They run their scheme on the defensive side of the ball much differently. Their inside defensive tackles are looking to bull rush and press the pocket, and those guys on the outside like Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett are looking to jet upfield and run the hoop, compared to our defensive line. Inside, it's looking to split gaps but maintain gap discipline, and on those outside edges, you're looking to get that rush, but you don't want to overrun the arc, and you want to flatten out and press back into the quarterback to get him off of the spot. So the fact that they got the experience up against this defense and this defensive line specifically on how they work is only going to bode well for him during the season. But you're right, Will Hernandez, you could see during the offseason, he's leaned down a little bit. You could see his technique and his fundamentals and his feet underneath him, his hands and his feet tied together, instead of times in the past where we'd see him over-aggressive punching and get out of balance and getting pulled through. Andrew Thomas, the one thing I will say about him is he is firing his hands. He's way more confident. He's starting the fight where you restart and redirect the defensive end, keeping an inside number landmark. Those are all things that last year, without having an offseason, getting thrust right into the fire as left tackle, sometimes when the adversity hits, unfortunately, you revert back to some bad habits. He hasn't been doing that this camp.
Well, it looks to me like he's got much more confidence knowing that he's in year 2 as a pro, because remember when he used to cheat on his feet with his sets all the time. To me, that was almost counterproductive because he was getting beat and then he was making it worse.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I love what Joe Judge did with the offensive line, to bring in Rob Sale, Ben Wilkerson, and then to bring Pat Flaherty back, my offensive line coach. Anytime you see the offensive line during individual drills, or anytime that they're away from team drills, they've got a coach hands-on going through each and every fundamental that they need to continue to hone in on, whether it's double teams, zone blocks, pass protection. They're getting all the individual attention needed in order to make sure that come through when it comes to the game time. I know a lot of people say, trust your technique. Well, what does that mean? When adversity hits, now all of a sudden you've got somebody ripping off of the edge and you're only in your second kick. Are you going to be disciplined enough to take that third kick to make sure you get the cutoff and intersection angle? Or are you going to revert back and turn that outside shoulder and be a turnstile? Those are the things that they've worked on this entire camp.
And to be honest, without Clowney and Garrett practicing against them this week, even though it was the Browns scheme, without those two superstars, or at least presumed superstars, I think that was probably a confidence builder, because if you go up against those guys and they beat you, now that's going to crack your confidence.
Yeah, I get that, but at the same time, in order to be the best, you've got to play up against the best, and they're going to challenge you not only with speed, but their ability to turn speed into power and bull rush you and use different hands so that your timing isn't the exact same. So it may have been a confidence booster, but even with that, you want to play up against the best and challenge yourself, because that's what's going to not only bring the best out of you, but give you the game experience that you're going to need to play on Sundays.
David, let's flop it over to defense. We have some time remaining. The defensive line, I thought, believe it or not, David Moa might have been one of the more active linemen in this game against the Browns, but during the course of the week, I thought Leonard Williams had a nice week in Browns practice.
Leonard Williams was completely unblockable at times, even by a Cleveland Browns offensive line that is one of the top 3 in the league. He's gotten so efficient with his technique and his ability to read guards, whether it's zone, whether it's a power scheme. More importantly, on the backside of plays, his ability to either penetrate through double teams or to be able to take great angles so he can't get cut off by a guard or a tackle. He had how many tackle for a loss this week because he was running flat down the line of scrimmage untouched. And when you have that happening up front, that allows Blake Martinez and these linebackers to run sideline to sideline.
And remember, in these joint practices, we're seeing more physicality and contact in the trenches. And Danny Shelton, again, proves that he's very tough to move.
It's tough to move. Danny Shelton, if he gets his feet in the ground and has leverage, you are not moving him from point A to point B up against his own will. Very familiar with this scheme, not only from his time in New England, but now having his time with Patrick Graham again. You know he understands that he is a two-gapper. He's meant to eat up things at the line of scrimmage, hold off double teams. And like I said, those are the types of guys that Coach Flaherty would be like, hey, you've got to forklift him out of there. If Danny Shelton has his feet in the ground and leverage, you are not forklifting him anywhere.
Let's look at the linebackers for a minute. Again, the Giants did not use any of their starters in the game against the Browns. From the backup perspective, was there anything you saw there that really stuck out?
Well, the thing that we know is that Carter Coughlin is playing multiple positions. They're trying to show his versatility. And the one area where you think about is with Tate Crowder and Reggie Ragland. You know, both of these players we've seen be stout up against the run, but they've been challenged when it comes to coverage. So those are the areas that we're going to continue to need to watch and focus on to see if they are those valuable guys that can be backups. When it came to starters and Blake Martinez, There were times during practice that he was running through holes because he identified a pre-snap and tapped the running back in the backfield to where Kevin Stefanski was just shaking his head because there's nothing you can do about it. His ability to read things and pre-diagnose them, but more importantly, his ability to communicate it at the same time. That's something that's invaluable to a defense, and that goes not only to the front end, but to the back end.
The other backer who had a really good practice in Cleveland, or two practices, was Lorenzo Carter, who was especially good on the second day. And in the game, O'Shane Ximines showed some nice ability on a pass rush, coming up with a sack.
The great thing you see out of Lorenzo Carter is zero hesitation or mental awareness of his injury that he's coming off of. You see him being explosive at the line of scrimmage. There were times where they were trying to run an outside zone where David Njoku, who's not a small individual, Lorenzo Carter was bookending him at the point of attack and forcing him everything inside, as well as his pass rush moves. O'Shane Ximines, we know he's not the biggest body guy, but at the same time, he's got to do a much better job of being slippery with his hands to bend and reach those edges in order to get around those long offensive tackles. So he's a player that we know that if he continues to work on those secondary moves and can combat offensive tackles' first moves, that's where things can really open up for him.
Much like what we saw on the first day against the Browns during that practice session, the Giants secondary had a much better second day. Today, we did not see any of the starters, but we saw all the backups. In fact, it was McKinney and Love at the safeties, Holmes and Madre Harper at the corners. What did you see from these guys in the game? Because we pretty much know who the starting four is going to be in the backfield.
Well, I love Julian Love. He is the overworked,
busy
guy. He is busy. He can play all the spots, and he does the dirty work and doesn't get the recognition for it. Xavier McKinney obviously got a late start to his season last year due to the injury. He didn't come back till week 11, so he's continuing to get reps. And one of the greatest things behind them is Logan Ryan being able to be hands-on to really get the X's and O's and make sure that they're up to speed with everything. So I love what they're bringing. Bradbury had an unbelievable week at practice. Obviously, once again, going up against great talent on the opposite side of the ball. And Adoree Jackson is another one. You wouldn't think that he is a new player on this Giants defense. He fits right in. He's part of the personality. And that's the one great thing that you see about this Giants football team. They are really getting that cohesion and coming together on both sides of the ball.
One thing that was also noticeable during the game is that Rodarius Williams, the rookie out of Oklahoma State, continues to play multiple positions. They had him back as the deep safety in this game.
Yeah, he played corner. He played slot corner. He played safety. And the more they can utilize him and playing in different spots and get experience, it's only going to help them on the back end, because Paul, you and I both know one of the issues for the Giants defense down the stretch, it wasn't the defensive line, it was the inability to play man coverage on the back end and have that competency before the pass rush and the pass coverage, because we always know what's the best pass rush is a coverage. What's the best coverage is a pass rush. So when you can get those two things working in tandem, that's what works to the best benefit of your defense and what Patrick Graham can show pre-snap to what he's going to run post-snap in coverages.
Let's quickly talk about special teams before we kick it out of here. I thought there were two guys who kind of made themselves noticeable in the game. Matt Cole, the little guy they list him at 5'10", but I don't think that he is, maybe on stilts. He got down there a couple of times in kick coverage, and I thought Nico Lalos also did, although he did miss one tackle there.
Yeah, but you know what? He bounced back and made another one, and the one thing that you love is that he learned from it. He wrapped through and ran through the second one, and you could see him flying down there. And as a Princeton player, that's he's not Princeton.
He's an
Ivy League guy. Dartmouth guy. You've got to be able to contribute on special teams in order to make this roster. And for Matt Cole to be able to come in and just do it sparingly in practice and to have him out in the game, to make 2 tackles as a gunner on the punt team, and then to come out there and make some plays on the defensive side of the ball, whether it was a pass breakup or a tackle, he's one of those guys that you can utilize as a developmental player who can bring a lot of value to your football team down the stretch.
Okay, David, as we wrap things up, I'm going to ask you to be Joe Judge for just a second. You've got 1 week of joint practices to go in Foxborough with the Patriots, and one final preseason game during which your starters will play probably a half, maybe a little longer. What do you still want to see? What are the kinds of decisions and questions that are still giving you trouble?
Well, number one, I just want to see that right side of the offensive line with Matt Parrott and with Nate Solder compete. I want to see who's going to step up and rise to the challenge. As you said, Nate Solder has been on a pitch count, so hasn't been getting a ton of reps. And the one thing with Matt is when he's on, but he hasn't been consistent. The one thing that he needs to do is be more aggressive. He's got to be more physical with his hands, and he needs to show more confidence in his pass sets. And then for me, turning to the defensive side of the ball, the one thing that I continue to harp about is who is going to be those backup defensive linemen and defensive ends that can contribute to the pass rush. We know about Dexter Lawrence. We know about Leonard Williams. Lorenzo Carter's playing well, but who out of that next group of batch of guys can be those rotational players? Because on the defensive side, you're at your best when it's almost like hockey line shifts at the defensive line. 2 in, 2 out, and you can keep those bodies fresh.
David Diehl, 2-time Super Bowl champion with the Giants. We'll see you this week at practice.
Can't wait.
That'll do it for this edition of the Giants Huddle. You can catch it on Giants.com and the Giants mobile app. Until next time, I'm Paul Dottino. So long, everybody.